So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Deborah Sloan, and I am the president of the Northwest Ceramics Foundation. I would like to welcome you all to this presentation of Winnipeg artist Grace Nickel, but first some housekeeping. The Northwest Ceramics Foundation is grateful for and acknowledges it operates on land that is the unceded shared traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, including the territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. We stand in solidarity with all communities marginalized due to race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or age, and commit ourselves to opposing racism in all its forms. For those not currently on our mailing list, we encourage you to go to our website, www.nwcf.ca. Go to the blue button on the top of every page and then ask to join our mailing list. Then we can send you invitations to any speaker series or events. And on that note, I'd like to let you know that the speaker series in the spring of 2025 will feature two artists who explore metaphysical concepts of transformation, being, and utopia. Linda Swanson from Montreal will be speaking on Sunday, March 15, and Eliza Au from Vancouver, now teaching in Texas, will be speaking on Sunday, April 6th. Stay tuned for more information on these great talks, and they will be all on Zoom. For the duration of the talk, we ask that you mute yourselves and turn off your video, and this improves the transmission. At the end of the talk, we'll have a discussion with the assistance of Carol Mayer, talking with all of us, and Grace. And any questions you want to put in the chat, or you can stick your hand up to be recognized. Please note the talk is being recorded, and we'll post the talk on our website pretty soon. And you can also check out the other recordings of our other Zoom presentations, which are excellent. I am now very pleased to introduce our speaker, Grace Nickel. Artist and educator, Grace lives in Winnipeg, Manitoba on Treaty 1 territory, where she teaches full-time at the University of Manitoba. Her large-scale sculptures and installations have received international attention and been widely exhibited. She has won awards in the International Mino Ceramics Competition in Japan and the Golden Ceramic Awards in Taipei, Taiwan. And she has competed successfully in competitions for national public commissions. Grace travels widely in Canada and abroad for residencies and speaking engagements. She is a member of the International Academy of Ceramics and the Royal Canadian Academy of Arts. Grace received the Governor General's Sadie Bronfman Award in 2023. Congratulations. Grace's talk, The Historical and Contemporary Legacy of Anabaptist Ceramics, will explore her cultural heritage and family history, revealing how this research has had profound impact on her ceramics practice. So please welcome Grace Nickel.
Thank you very much, Deborah, for that very generous introduction. And before I begin, I just want to say thank you to the Northwest Ceramics Foundation for inviting me to speak, especially to Deborah and Amy for all their organizational work, and also to Carol Mayer, who has been a huge help with my research in this area, which is still very new to me. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and begin my lecture. Okay. Is everyone able to see that?
Yes.
So my talk is called The Historical and Contemporary Legacy of Anabaptist Ceramics. And I came across Anabaptist ceramics quite by accident 4 years ago when I was teaching a section on Maiolica in my low-fire ceramics class. So I started to do a bit of research to create a slideshow of Maiolica works. And I actually came across, before I go on, I am going to also leave the land acknowledgement slide up for a bit while I speak. And what happened after I discovered what was called Anabaptist ceramics while I was preparing my lecture for my students, pretty much took over my focus and has continued to. So I will start with an example of Anabaptist ceramics on the left, a jug, and you can see that they've used a kind of splatter technique, and on the right is a piece of mine. So I'll talk just a little bit about the history of the Anabaptists. I talk focuses on the ceramics produced by Anabaptist potters of Central and Northern Europe, and their pottery came to be known as Habanware, as their ceramics is called. And beginning in the 16th century and continuing until the late 19th century, it was actually a very rigorous part of the community production. And the Anabaptists were actually a rebellious group that splintered away from pretty much everything and during the Protestant Reformation. And they decided that they were going to actually form their own sect, and it included belief in adult baptism and no military service, and also a complete separation of church and state. So the Anabaptists became somewhat nomadic because pretty much everywhere they went, they were persecuted. Menno Simons actually started, or is one of the founders of the Anabaptist movement in Switzerland, and this is mid-1500s. So eventually the Anabaptists actually split up into several branches, Mennonite and Hutterite, also Doukhobors, and the Amish. So I am Mennonite, and my ancestors came over to Canada in the late 1870s. I'm actually third generation Canadian. So I'm showing a photo. This is not the house my grandfather lived in, but this is the village where he grew up. So this is called Neubergtel, Manitoba, and this is actually a national historic site designated as such, I think, in 1989. So this village is actually very close to where I was both born and then actually spent my childhood also quite nearby. And it has actually been sort of restored, and there are people actually who inhabit these homes that are called house barns. So you'll see that the barns are connected directly to the house, which was a very practical way to structure things, especially with the kind of climate that we endure. So I'm going to jump ahead, and there's a map of what that village looks like. So it's a tree-lined street with houses on either side. And my grandfather actually grew up on what would be the east side of that central street. And my mother told me that every house, actually, all the doors of the homes were lined up, so you could walk right through from one end of the village to the other and just move right through everybody's porches as you did so. So it wasn't totally communal living, for the Mennonites, but there was a lot of shared resources. And that brings me to this slide, which is Herdsman House in Neubergtal. And this has actually been restored to its original, and also has now become an artist in residence program that takes place here that's run by Marguerite Cron and her husband Paul. They actually did all of the restoration. And I'll just point out, the houses were all white, but the elders in the community actually commanded that each house had some kind of colored trim. Of course, basic to the Anabaptist faith is a belief in austerity, stripping everything down to the bare minimum visually, and basically being iconoclast with no religious imagery used. And the houses also reflect that kind of restraint, but the color that was allowed in Neubergtal were specifically an ochre and a deep red color. This is the interior, and again, quite authentic. So without being able to use any imagery that includes humans and animals, the what happened was the aesthetic turned more towards a kind of abstract decoration. And eventually flowers were allowed into the repertoire. But you can see here a quilt, an old clock that would have been brought over from most likely Prussia, where many Mennonites came from. And also there was a tradition of floor painting, which my mother said she did every year with her mother. They refreshed the floors. It was both practical, helping to keep the dust down, but you can also see that again, this was really used as an outlet for creativity. And they would use pretty much anything they could get their hands on to make this kind of almost stenciled or stamped floor pattern. For instance, potatoes, maybe cut out cardboard, the bottoms of syrup pails or milk pails that I think you can see here on this floor. So these have been restored, and it's Marguerite Cron who has taken this on as a kind of mission and focus in her own practice. She is an artist, a painter. So here you can see that there's a close-up of the floor pattern. I also included a photo of one of the doors because they did leave the original paint on these doors. And here's the close-up. So of course, as a ceramic artist, I immediately go to either a crackle glaze or a crawl glaze that these make me think of. And I have actually been conducting some experiments and trying to somehow, if not replicate, certainly reference these super rich surfaces that say everything about time passing, and the kind of layering that occurs over time. So in 2020, I started making what I'm calling commemorative cameos. So these are about 8 inches tall. And I wanted to reference the Maiolica technique that is central to the Anabaptist ceramics. It's not the only thing they did, but it is certainly the bulk of their production. So, of course, all of us, I think, are familiar with Italian Maiolica, Delftware, even English Delftware, French faience. Those are all tin-based glazed ware. So I'm using a bit of a mix, but I have been using Maiolica and combining it with terra sigillata, which I have used for many years and I'm very comfortable with. So a little later, I'll talk a little bit more about some of the symbolism with these pieces. And I would be remiss if I didn't highlight amazing book by Carol E. Mayer, A Discerning Eye. And this is the Walter C. Kerner collection of European ceramics that this book illustrates beautifully. And Carol was also the original curator of the Kerner collection. Kerner came from the Czech Republic to BC, I believe it was, with already a pretty large collection of ceramics, in no small part, Haban. And the Museum of Anthropology has a full wing dedicated to his collection. So when I discovered this book, of course, I had our university library order it immediately. And of course, I have my own copy. And that plate is coming out of the book. And I have to also acknowledge Ken Mayer. The photographs are stunning. But I'll start with saying just a little bit about that plate, because that is early quintessential Anabaptist pottery, very plain, stark. The crest of, usually it's the crest of the client or the patron that you're going to see illustrated. So, of course, the potters were not allowed to sign their work, and at first couldn't impart any imagery other than usually that crest and the date. So that's what you're seeing here. And this is a little bit of a dimmer photo, but this is in the gallery itself. So a collection of plates. And then also the Anabaptist potters were known for their exquisite fretwork. The pierced pieces you can see there at the bottom. And I am not a historian, I'm an artist through and through. So I have borrowed these maps, and this shows the European journey of tin glazed earthenware, which is extensive. There's some Turkish influence, but it came up from Northern Africa, went through Spain to Majorca. And then you'll see an arrow that points directly at Faenza, which is still in Italy, the central place for Maiolica. And then you can see, of course, it branched out all over central into Northern Europe. And this is a map of the Haban Anabaptist that is also shown in the museum. And this is the area I'm most interested in, because with all the movement that occurred due to religious persecution, the potters, for the most part, ended up in these countries. And it lasted the longest in the area of Moravia and also Slovakia, which was formerly Northern Hungary, with actually some activity still existing in, for instance, Modra, and certainly some attempt to either revive or replicate some of the original Habanware. And this is also from the museum. And I think these are a good example of how just gradually some imagery crept in. And again, somehow plants were deemed safe for representation. So that's what you're seeing on these pieces. You're also often going to see the double band of cobalt blue on top of the white Maiolica, which very much contains the embellishment, the painting. And I find that that connects very clearly with a rule-bound society, such as the Anabaptists would and continue to be. And here you can see that those bands have disappeared. What's really handy is how on most pieces, the dates are very clear. So I think certainly historians and anthropologists would appreciate this because, again, you can see the name of the patron and then very clearly 1639. This is a gorgeous example from the book, A Discerning Eye, of an open work or fretwork piece. So these potters were highly, highly skilled, and they were very successful because the aristocracy or nobility of the day would commission these works. Now, of course, the potters themselves were not allowed to make these works for themselves or use them. They were only allowed to make completely plain, unadored, very utilitarian ware. And all the potters were actually bound by what's called the Book of Ordinances, or in German, Ordnungen. And that was actually a book of rules, do's and don'ts for potters that was created by the elders of the community. So it's quite interesting. I haven't found the full list yet, but they weren't allowed to make any changes in the forms on their own or the imagery. Everything was really quite subscribed or prescribed, I should say, for them. So here you see some blue Maiolica and a whole range of actually different blues in this case. So of course, then white on blue became really quite desirable. And you'll see that kind of scale pattern on the bottom that keeps appearing. And also on the top, a kind of, again, working within the boundaries of some linear restrictions, but also moving outside of that. So I find gradually the work became a little bit more spontaneous. I'm particularly fond of the marbled ware. So in the bottom row there, the jug at the left, and then that's cobalt on white. And then the purple, where they're clearly using a manganese dioxide base and probably a white overglaze stain, or that is actually the Maiolica itself interacting with the color. And I have made it my mission to figure out how to replicate these particular techniques. I haven't totally figured it out yet. So these are also taken from Carol's book, and you get a better sense there of how stunning those surfaces are. A lot of things were tankards for alcohol, which I also find ironic because, of course, there's also pretty stiff rules about alcohol consumption in the Anabaptist world. Then eventually animals actually started to appear. So this plate, the top one, you can see there's a deer somewhat awkwardly introduced, but I guess they didn't have a lot of practice yet. So again, very clearly the date is included, 1696. And this is also in the museum. And I'm particularly interested in the turquoise shape, apparently part of an architectural ornament of some sort for most likely a stove tile or a stove. And I'm using this kind of shape as my central form because it relates to forms I see in the Anabaptist repertoire, but also I'm seeing it more as a kind of portraiture. And so because I don't really know, in fact, exactly who my ancestors were, with being third generation Canadian, it's interesting how that lineage can easily be lost or get kind of murky over time. But I'm not interested in any event in creating any kind of representative portraits, but I do see that oval form, of course, used a lot in terms of frames in uh, portrait photography, for instance. So there's that kind of reference, certainly making a connection through these, I suppose, abstract portraits with my ancestors. This is also a stove tile, and I think it's really quite stunning. It does make me think of Tang Dynasty. Work with those colors. And again, I find there's a lot of control in this, but then right in the center, it's like somebody has sort of escaped from that book of ordinances and gone a little crazy with the glazes. So this is another thing I'm very interested in, is that kind of more amorphous type of imagery and the flowing together. That makes me also think of how um, our uh, our histories, our own histories, can become very layered and not all that clear, in fact. And this is a stunning piece in the Kerner collection. Not Maiolica, but a manganese-based glaze. It's basically looks black. And it's large. It's a little hard to see in a slide. But also, again, just I think speaks to the strength of the skill and the aesthetic. So I'm going to start my travel log, I'll call it. So in search of finding more Anabaptist pottery, Haban in particular, Haban meaning to have in German, or more so the idea of, I think, collective to have or communal sorts of shared lifestyle. And I was very fortunate to get a 6-month sabbatical. So I went to Kecskemét in Hungary for a residency at the International Ceramic Studio. I worked in that long building. My studio was actually those windows to the right. This is where we lived. And while in Kecskemét, I discovered the Janos Bojo collection. And this was established by Janos Bojo and has been taken over by his son. So I'll just show some examples of it's all Hungarian pottery. And these especially captured my attention because, again, there's such a kind of abandon that is apparent. And it's, again, using a splattering technique on the left, but on the right, they've combined marbling and splattering. I saw a lot of this green glaze where there's a sort of almost bleaching of the glaze. And so far, I'm not really clear on how that was accomplished. And these pieces I thought were remarkably beautiful, blue and white and green and white. I was also fortunate, Janos allowed me to actually take some of the pieces out of the cabinets. And I wanted to know, again, about that marbling. How did they do it? So when I turned the piece over, it confirmed what I had thought, that it was only a surface on the exterior, not within the clay itself. And this checkerboard pattern is another thing I find very attractive. 1835, this is the same piece, 2 views. And I quite appreciate how much joy they seem to have had in decorating this piece, but also in making the date part of that whole aesthetic. This is common where they are repairing the pieces using wire. And it was actually somebody's job, this very thing, to make sure the pieces could continue to be functional, this one has in fact lost its handle. So now I'm going to jump into my experimentation, where I was at first very tentatively moving into this marbling research. So I've made a little mold, and I'm using eyedroppers, just dropping the overglaze stain, you see black and blue there, into the slip directly when I'm casting. These were the results, which weren't particularly successful, but it was a start. So I made a larger mold of my oval form. And here you can see I've introduced the overglaze stain into the mold itself when it already had some slip in it. And you can see on the right what my result is. So this was more promising. As it turned out, the best part was on the back of the piece, so I just flipped it around and used that. And there's the finished form. So this is white Maiolica in the center with blue stain. And then the clay itself, of course, is marbled with the blue. I also experimented with red and green, and then continued to work primarily with the black and the blue. I'm inserting this because I saw ovals everywhere in Kecskemét and in Hungary, and it reinforced for me how central that shape is in terms of architecture, but also, as you can see here, a kind of framing device as well. Thought I'd try some lattice work. There's the finished piece. So in total, I made about a dozen cameos while in Kecskemét. Then I got really quite wild and tried the splattering technique, tried it with a stencil. And there you can see some of my results using that crackle glaze, some splattering, and also, of course, the stencil. So again, working with the red and green, but also that kind of idea of the fluted edge, almost like a ruffled kind of edge. Also still honoring the vessel forms, as you can see sitting there on a little podium. And here I'm still thinking about the connection to Anabaptist fashion, I'll call it. So sort of referencing in this case a headpiece, and then also a lace collar, black being quite central to clothing, and certainly fashion in terms of going to any sort of religious occasions, and generally just using it as a sort of, I guess, also austere sort of measure. And here I tried some of the ochre and the red. There's a cross in the center and a branch kind of motif in behind it. And then this harkens back to that stove tile I showed, where I'm trying to work with a sort of mingling of the colors, in this case, an orange and a blue overglaze stain. And again, this on black Maiolica, it creates almost like a mirror finish, which seems appropriate to me in terms of reflecting also the viewer back to themselves. And also did a series of blue and white forms. Again, you can see a vessel with a basin on top. We had a show, and here it was 6 of us in the residency, and there's my pieces. For some reason, they weren't able to hang them on the wall, but there they are. And then, of course, it was time to ship everything home. So they make these really beautiful metal cases for the residents for a cost, of course, on wheels, and everything arrived home very safely. But before going home, there was extensive travel through parts of Hungary and into Slovakia and also Austria. This is the Hungarian National Museum, which has some beautiful examples of Habanware. Here's that oval again with a copper green splatter on the maiolica, white maiolica. And the new Museum of Ethnography had just opened in Budapest. So, of course, had to check that out. So this is what you see when you go in, and I think there's at least 3 of these almost endless banks of shelves, as you can see here, crammed full of pottery. So this was remarkable. There's that piece on the left and another favorite on the right. I thought these were really fun. And again, that's sort of bleaching of the green. These pieces are combed. So the piece on the right, it may well be my favorite piece of ceramics right now. And I'm determined to use that kind of combing, but also the movement, working with the material when it's wet, and then, of course, through the firing, in a way, freezing it in place. And marble piece on the left and more open work. And then, of course, vintage stores was a lot of fun. So you can find, you're not going to most likely find any original Haban pieces, but you are going to find certainly some beautiful Hungarian ceramics. This 790 puff or Hungarian forints is about $2.89 Canadian. So then I totally humbled myself and decided to try my hand at Haban painting. So I took a workshop. It was a one-day workshop with Ramona Ballot, who you see here on the right, who is just a master and replicates original Haban works. This is at the Dr. Kresh Maria Foundation in Budapest, where they're actually trying to keep the Haban tradition alive and teach the original techniques. And I think they have quite a rigorous program that takes place. On the left, you can see the jug. That's actually the symbol for the potters. And that is, in fact, a potter's wheel that's also quite heavily decorated. So these were going into an expo in Milan, and she had been asked to recreate some of the forms. So there's me. We started working on paper first. Looks like I'm certainly enjoying myself. And then very quickly we went on to working on ceramic tiles. And of course, for the most part, the maiolica is applied to a red earthenware. And that's what has happened here. So we started with just a pencil drawing. It was very specific. I was asked to bring a 7B super soft pencil. And there's my first attempt at a floral motif. And I just want to point out the brush, because I had spent quite a lot of money on some brand new sable brushes in Budapest, and Ramona actually whittled it down for me, because to do the linear work, you need a super fine point. They actually sent it to me after I returned home, along with a few extra books on Habanware. The one on the right is in Hungarian, but I can still look at the pictures, and that is on post-Haban. And then off to Italy, and this is the Faenza Art Ceramic Center, where I enrolled in another workshop. And this is actually across the street from the International Museum of Ceramics, which has, I believe, the world's largest collection of Maiolica. Quite stunning. I worked with Vilma Bossi on the left, and she's making a kind of gelatinous concoction for floating colored ceramic stains on top of. That's the studio we worked in. And there's me trying out the floated overglaze stains on one of my pieces. So that's it, just coming out of there, that vat. And I thought it needed a little bit more pizzazz, so I added some blue, which you can see on the right. And that, of course, is pink or sort of a mauve color before it's fired. So there it is, fired. And then that one had a clear glaze over it, wasn't Maiolica underneath first. But on these tests, we made the Maiolica stay wet, and they had different materials they were using, which unfortunately were only available in the ceramic supply shop that they are very closely connected to. So here, the overglaze stains are actually, in a way, slip trailed onto the unfired Maiolica. And you can see a kind of combing that I was practicing. So here are pretty much all of the works I made there and a few older ones thrown in. But I did a whole series of small tests first and then enlarged. And I'm happy to say everything arrived home safely. Then I'm going to make a bit of a leap here because while I was in Europe, I had been made aware of my winning the Sadie Bronfman Award. So from a distance, I was actually engaged with all the kind of, responsibilities that come with that, which includes making a video and or having a video made of you, a portrait. And that link I've actually included in this talk at the end. So the Sadie Bronfman Award, of course, is recognizing fine crafts in Canada. And the Winnipeg Art Gallery decided they wanted to honor me by giving me a solo show. So we had maybe 3 months to put that together. But it wasn't something I was about to pass up. It was a survey exhibition of sorts where they weren't calling it a retrospective per se, but it did show a range of my work over my long practice. That is Tammy Sutherland on the left, and she nominated me on behalf of the Manitoba Craft Council, where she's the director for the Sadie Bronfman Award. And on the right is curator, WAG curator, Riva Simcoe. And they co-curated this exhibition for me. I'm very grateful to both of them. And I was able to show some of my commemorative cameos for the first time. And you'll see that they're on backdrops. Those are actually digitally printed fabric backdrops, which I'm connecting to the textile work, certainly of my forebears, thinking of maybe floor cloths or, certainly some of the quilting. So mixing it up using some of my, branch drawings and tessellating them, and also using actually artifacts from very new technologies like 3D printing. So I'm not interested in replicating the original or the historic Anabaptist ceramics or in fact textiles, but to make something of my own that is definitely informed by this new research. And here you can see I've got sort of these growths emerging from the surface, which I'm still using natural motifs as well as a frame of reference. The exhibition was called Inter Arte et Naturam, which means between art and nature. And I felt that was for really a survey show, maybe the best way to summarize what I have focused on throughout my decades of making. I also became sort of obsessed with making these mini coil-built vessels. And even though it may not look like it, I find that the vessel is still very central to my thought process in ceramics, even though it ends up being more sculptural in nature. This is a piece where I tried mocha diffusion for the first time. So in my case, I used the terra sigillata with some vinegar. In fact, it's an acidic material that you need to drop into the wet terra sig. Apparently, coffee can be used, and that's why it's called mocha diffusion. Another example where you can see some of my little transfer prints on top of those eruptions that are coming out of the surface of the form. And you can see I often move back and forth between the two-dimensional and the three-dimensional and reiterate very similar kinds of motifs, as in this case, both on the ceramic form and the backdrop, which is a kind of wallpaper-like element. And this is one where it's the backdrop started with just a tiny drawing I did of the negative spaces, really, of a tree I see out my window all the time. And I work with my husband, Michael Zayach, who is very talented digitally, and he always figures out a way to transform what I've done and takes it to the next level. So it sort of picks up where I leave off, I would say. And then, of course, a ceramic piece of mine in the center. Another one with some, in this case, open work. And here's a close-up of that. And then, of course, you start to see that background through the piece itself. Just a few quick images of the exhibition at the Winnipeg Art Gallery, Kamwayuk. And I won't go through the dates and details of all of these forms, but all of these, of course, combined led up to my becoming, I think, the recipient of the Sadie Bronfman Award. And again, you'll see that I started out with vessel making. And at one point, I started to work with ceramics and glass. There's an example of one of my wall sconces. There was a period of time where I made many of these as either artworks for exhibition or for commissions, primarily private commissions. So it's slumped glass that's been sandblasted, inserted into my ceramic form. This is more recent work of, well, 2015. And this is now in actually the collection of the Winnipeg Art Gallery. It's called Arbor Vitae. There's a close-up. I did a lot of fungal kind of growth work on the interior. It was very challenging to make this because I had to insert all of that information before I actually combined. Each of these was made as 3 parts, then put together. But I had to make all of the fungal motifs and then, in fact, also glaze it before these were put together. And then this also has cutouts on top. So that allows the light in so you can actually peer in and discover this other whole world. And there's a photo of what's called Host. And Host is made starting with a fabric, positive, and then a mold made from that. This lecture isn't about that, so I'm not going to go into all the details of these. Espalier is a series of tiles. They're actually made by sintering ceramic material onto porcelain. These are all made of Jingdezhen porcelain, which, yes, I actually had shipped home. So those are done in a laser cutter where each pixel is actually sintered on, and it's permanent, just like it would be in a kiln. And then after that exhibition, as a Sadie Bronfman Award winner, I was invited to be part of the exhibition at the National Gallery of Canada. And that is the Governor General's Awards in the Visual and Media Arts exhibition. Each of us got our own space. So here you can see my commemorative cameos on their backdrops. I added one extra for this exhibition, which was the blue and white that I had made in Budapest and shows an orange background. So you can see that the motifs often are reused, but they're totally reinvented. In this case, for the top row, that pattern is actually from a photograph I took of a clay piece being 3D printed. So it's the kind of tracking that occurs as it's building up the form. So there's the latest. These now are all part of the collection of the Canadian Museum of History, because a huge bonus of being the Sadie Bronfman Award winner is that the Canadian Museum of History acquires your work. In the foreground here, you can see my installation Eruptions, and there's a close-up. I've worked a lot with tree limbs, and here you can also see a kind of eruption of what I think of as maybe flowers, or again, in this case, they're miniature vessels. In fact, that center is where the original cameos came from. So I often have that kind of continuity in my practice where I will borrow from myself, I'll call it. And this, each one of these pyres, as I called them, the tree limbs had sort of a lifeline of beads that was sort of emerging from underneath. And for me, I see this as a kind of root system, branching, and some people even said they felt it looked more like an umbilical cord. And there's a close-up. So a lot of these are also small vessels. And then one more celebration after the all the activity in Ottawa, which also did include a medal ceremony with Her Excellency Mary Simon, our Governor General. But here's a little known fact. I grew up in the community of Plum Coulee, Manitoba, which is where Sadie Bronfman, in fact, was born and also grew up. So when Plum Coulee turned 100, they created a park in her name, and it was her daughter, Phyllis Lambert, a famous architect, founder of the Canadian Architecture Center for Architecture, who wanted to honor her mother. So Plum Coulee built a park. And you can see here Sadie Rosner, her maiden name, Bronfman Heritage Recreation Park. This is on the site of the old train station in Plum Coulee. They even built a beach using a reservoir, and there it is. It's not even considered a town. It's a very small village. And the other major way Phyllis wanted to pay tribute to her mother was by helping Plum Coulee create a museum in the grain elevator. It's called the Plum Coulee Elevator Museum. I still have quite a lot of relatives in the area, and one of my cousins decided I should have an exhibition in the grain elevator. So there's the space before I took over. So it is, in fact, the history of Plum Coulee. And I'm including this because these are hats that Mennonite women made. And even though, again, all in black, you can see, especially on the right, how fancy they became. So I think there's just a natural inclination to want to make something beautiful, to embellish. And my mother told me that women would collect whatever they could really get their hands on. And sometimes it would include beads, ribbon, lace, and she said even straw. Sometimes they would dye straw. So my grandfather was actually first a teacher and then a Mennonite minister, and he had to wear black head to toe. So if, for instance, he ended up buying a black shirt with white buttons, my grandmother had to cut all the buttons off and replace them with black buttons. My own mother was supposed to wear a black wedding dress, and she refused and somehow convinced her dad to let her wear white. But these hats have been quite central to some of the works I've made. As you'll see in a moment, this is the overview of the space once Michael and I got our hands on it. So this piece is quite directly related to those hats, which are called Spitzemetze in German, pointy hats, or Krusemetze, which is like a ruffled hat. So again, I'm just taking little bits of that information and trying to transform it into something, again, that is new and something that is my own. And there's another angle in that little space, which was actually the office of the grain elevator. And this is a tribute to my mother, Elma Nickel, who we lost last year. So during all the mayhem of my Sadie Bronfman Award and all the celebrations, I was also dealing with very deep grief. She knew about the award, but very, very soon after left us. So this is a tribute to my mother. These are all pieces I gave her over the years. And this actually reenacts exactly what she had in her living room for many years. And some of the pieces, I hesitated because some are very, very old. And I'm sure a lot of artists can relate to how those early pieces somehow end up in the homes and collections of our relatives. But I wanted to do this for my family, my immediate family. And as I said, many relatives still live in the area. This is in southern Manitoba. It's an hour and a half from Winnipeg. And I also thought it made a lot of sense because, of course, people in the community would be familiar with my mother. I went a bit rustic because that was certainly the theme of this venue. And these are actually timbers that they've cut from the elevator's structure somewhere. And again, some small piers. And these also are carrying vessels, almost like canoes. And I had to, I absolutely felt it was necessary and important to show at least one of my tree forms there, because growing up, living on the Bald Prairie, and I don't think there's any place flatter in the world than where I grew up in southern Manitoba. And trees meant something to me. They always did. And of course, almost every tree is planted quite strategically in that part of the world as a either windbreak or shelter for homes. And I would say my love of trees has continued. And to finish off, I have to show you this great honor I had as the parade marshal in the Plum Coulee Parade in August. So this car couldn't quite fit into the picture frame. It's a 1950s Chevy, I think. I hope I got that right. And anyway, I think this is the kind of thing that can only happen in a small town. It was a real blast. So in closing, I would like to express my gratitude, support from the Winnipeg Arts Council, Manitoba Arts Council, Canada Council for the Arts, and University of Manitoba. There are also many people and organizations to acknowledge, and certainly I want to again express gratitude to Carol Mayer. She's taken a lot of time with me in the Kerner collection itself, walking me through, and also outside of that. And also my husband, Michael, who is always there and couldn't be more supportive. He also has, as I mentioned, pretty wicked technical skills of all sorts and is also trained in design. So we do collaborate on works. The National Gallery, Janos Bojo, Marguerite Cron, International Ceramic Studio, Dr. Kresh Maria Foundation and Pottery Center, and the Fienza Art Ceramic Center. And I apologize if I've forgotten anybody. And in closing, I will say you can see more of my work if you go to my website, gracenicol.ca. And then I've also actually provided the link that is for the portrait that was made for my Sadie Bronfman Award. And it's an interesting process. It's quite competitive. People actually bid to do your video. And I was very, very fortunate to have, I think, possibly one of the best videographers. So if you get a chance to check that out, I would recommend it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Grace. That was wonderful.
I know I went over time, sorry.
Yeah. Can you see me? Yeah.
Yes.
So I just wanted to thank you very much for your presentation. It has been recorded. It'll go up in a couple of weeks. So anybody with questions, can you start putting them in the chat? And I'd like to introduce Carol Mayer, who is the curator, was the head curator at MOA. And we recently all got together to look at the Kerner collection. And Carol is going to field any questions if you are anybody wants to ask some stuff. So there you go. I will leave it off to you.
Okay, first of all, I want to thank you, Grace. That was amazing. And I particularly love the connections that you made between your commemorative cameos and what I call cloth, the textiles of the past, and using the digital, just pulling it all together was magic. One of the things that we intended to do in the gallery was always to somehow relate the ceramics in the gallery to the contemporary world. And which we did by bringing in contemporary potters. But I was wondering, in your work, one of the underlying themes of the gallery exhibit is to do with migration, as you mentioned, and persecution and racism and so forth. And I was wondering if you could elaborate how any of that underpins or has informed your work.
Oh, that is a very good question, because I think there is something about generational memory, even though in the case of my family, because we're already quite far removed, we don't have um, specific stories as such, whereas I find a lot of my friends, they're first generation, and they actually have horrific stories of what happened to their families in Europe. So I think for me, it probably has more to do with a concept of time, and if not so much persecution. But I have been guilty of not always embracing my Mennonitism. And I would say for me, it's maybe more closely related to the ideas of austerity and order and symmetry and those sorts of things. Because, I think maybe because we're further removed in terms of the heritage or the lineage. Um, I don't actually know where to go in Europe to find where my ancestors would have been. I can sort of maybe vaguely figure it out. But I would say in terms of the sort of nomadism or the changing landscape that my ancestors would have experienced, there, it's somewhat not evident in the pottery. There's just always this stability, which I find with my work. I'm always straddling a line between a kind of austerity, but also almost over decorated. So, yeah, I would say, I'm not answering your question that specifically, but I also don't want to pretend that those, themes are maybe for me at the forefront. It's always hard to know because there's a lot of I think a lot of what happens too is and Carol and I have talked about this before. Why didn't I know about Anabaptist pottery before? It somehow didn't come over to North America. At least I haven't, except for, of course, the Kerner collection, found any examples. So I think there's also a kind of inferiority complex that can set in. And someone said, well, of course, nobody knows about Anabaptist Maiolica. Everyone knows about Italian, the Delftware, the English Delftware, the French faience. But I think when it is created by someone like the Anabaptists who weren't always popular, they didn't want to be in military service, then there's a kind of a feeling that it's not worthy. And I think for me, I just really want to fill that gap that exists, both in my work, my personal development, but also in terms of education. Anyway, I took that sort of all over the place, but
That's okay. Actually, when I was in Prague a few years ago, and I was talking to Jana Kibalova, who was one of the experts on these wares, and she said that during the time when they were occupied, these early wares were removed from display and kept in the basement. And so it was a great joy when the Velvet Revolution happened that they could come once again to the surface. It was as though the memory, if you will, was suppressed. But one of the things you and I talked back and forth about when we walked through the gallery was the words Anabaptist and the word Haban, because Maria Kristinkovich here in Vancouver separated the two by thinking about Anabaptists as being absolutely conformist, absolutely commune living and following all the ordinances, and Haban being of the group, but actually further, not so tied to the strictures of the ordinances. I don't know. We went back and forth on that, didn't we? We couldn't seem to land.
Yeah, I've done quite a lot of reading, and it seems to me that Haban is more connected to the Hutterites ultimately,
Mhm.
and the Habaners, I think, were the ones who were in living in the like communal lifestyle of the Hutterites, and workshops in terms of pottery would have also been run in that way. So it is a little bit confusing for me. Anabaptist, I use as the umbrella term because that was really the start of it. And it's an ethno-religious sect that then, of course, like many things, started to also branch out and divide. So I think for me, it's important to know that there's a kind of connection I can make personally and a claim I can make. As far as Haban ware, it seems to me that that uh, maybe was used later in terms of
Mhm.
um, the works that were made, and again, that's what stuck. And eventually, I'm sure because it's not that easy to pick up a pottery studio and workshop and move kilns. Actually, a lot of the potters converted to Catholicism.
Mhm.
It meant they could continue making.
Mm.
So, yeah, I think I still have a lot to learn. Like I say, I'm not a historian, so I'm hoping to get a better grasp on all of that. But I, as an artist, of course, what I really want is to have to be inspired by the work and to have it inform my
Mhm.
practice. And that's starting to happen in kind of a so far a small way. I do have a show lined up in 2 years, and that might sound like a lot, but we all know it isn't. So I hope to expand and definitely do more of the research in preparation for that, and obviously a lot more making as well.
I must say, I was very excited when you first contacted me and had this incredible interest in the wares. I still think it's a little tiny bit sad that people don't know as much about the Kerner collection as they could. But I was also intrigued by the number of places that you'd been to where, there's an absolute plethora of examples. And so coming to the Kerner Gallery, one of the things that we did there was we put everything out. The only things I didn't put out was that if they were wrecked in some way or if they were fake. And I'm wondering when you saw it during our conversations and then afterwards, do you think in any way that that experience will inform your work?
Oh, I think it already has, I would say, because I visited the Kerner the first time, the Kerner collection, the first time in 2022,
Right.
and I was blown away by it at the time, and I still can't understand how I didn't know about it. I've been in ceramics for 4 decades now, and it just doesn't show up. It doesn't show up in ceramic books, ceramic art history books, magazines. So, as a university researcher and professor, I do have another goal, and that is to start making or building awareness of certainly the Anabaptist pottery, but yeah, also, of course, collections like the Kerner, and then European collections. Some I still certainly plan to visit. So I would say though, my first visit to the Kerner Collection Gallery um, has entered into my process, but also just conceptually that confirmed for me the use of that oval, which I know is not an original shape
Mhm.
to use, but it is for me new. And things like I pointed out that stove tile, the turquoise stove tile. There's some other platters they call Crespinas, which are also fluted. And those have stuck or stayed with me. And of course, I am really keen to figure out the techniques. And I think maybe that's what's a little bit unusual, is that I'm actually a ceramic artist delving into this research. So I take a different angle on it. But yeah, seeing those, I think the maybe more than anything, the blue and white marble jugs, but also the kind of purple pieces, which I think are trying to, you mentioned, mimic either stone or rock. And those are the pieces I find that I keep coming back to. But then I'm also very attracted to the stark white. There's something so pure and something, I would say, for me, quite comfortable with that kind of approach, really paring it down. And then, you know, there's that gradual kind of creeping in of imagery as well. I'm not that interested in representational imagery. I mean, in terms of what I do. So I don't think I'll start putting deer, for instance, on my works, but always just a kind of reference. And I hope that can continue as I glean more, and certainly through further travels, further research, I think that's going to happen.
Yeah.
So again, I don't know if I answered your question, but
well, it's such a broad subject. What I do find with the ceramics there is, of course, the whatever's on a ceramic doesn't happen at the moment of the experience that's that it's portraying. It happens after. So when the communes started breaking down, it was after that started to happen that they started changing the designs. So it's sort of a retro, in a way, it's sort of a retro look back on each time. It doesn't happen in the moment. And in fact, it's the struggle, it's the use of what is important to hang on to that. And when that hanging on starts, not to happen anymore for various reasons, then the designs start to change, I think.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, the evolution of the imagery on the pieces, where by the end, it's just like they're escaping. They're just letting loose, and they've thrown pretty much everything on to even one piece with, figures, architecture, just, yeah, no holds barred. And I find that work also intriguing, and yet I find it interesting that I always move back to the ones that have those, double blue lines, and
Yes.
everything is very, very orderly, because there's a beauty in both, certainly. So yeah, which is another area I'd like to do more research on, just to see, did that really happen? Because even some earlier pieces, it looks like they sort of broke free from the Book of Ordinances. So it'll be interesting. I think I have many more years on this track.
I think they're interesting portals, aren't they? The pieces, they open something. It's up to you to decide what that might be. Because we have gone over time. Is anybody out there have any questions they'd like to give to Grace? Or you can certainly contact her. No. Okay. So back to you, Deborah. Thank you. Thank you, Grace. That's fabulous.
Oh, thank you very much, Carol. I think you're muted, Carol. I mean, Carol, Deborah.
Deborah's muted.
There I am.
Yeah,
So
Deborah.
thanks very much for that discussion. And we did do a recording. I did a really recording at the Kerner just a few weeks ago with Grace and Carol talking, and we're going to try and wrangle it into something that can be put on our website. We just probably need a bit of expertise, but we will find it. And because it touched on some of these subjects, and there was very revealing discussion. It was excellent. So and so was this presentation. So thank you again very, very much, Grace. And lovely to
Thank
see you again. And we're going to let you all go. And thank you for attending. It's one of those kind of scholarly, kind of thoughtful subjects. And please visit the Kerner Gallery and please tell people about it. It is a simply beautiful gallery. So talk to you all soon and thank you. And I will end this Zoom.
Thank
Thank
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.
Gone.